question.
Yes.
If it pleases you. Our understanding was that we would be afforded the opportunity to make an opening statement. We think that, and we prepared on that basis. And we would like the opportunity to make that statement. Would you allow us?
The committee discussed that earlier. We feel we do have a lot of questions, and we hope that all that you would wish to say will come out during the course of questioning. If you feel that is not the case, then you can make a statement at the end. Excuse me, could we not have that, please?
Well, in that case, we would also like to submit the statement in writing, if it pleases you.
That would be perfectly acceptable.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Could we please remove the people holding up notices? Right, after that brief interruption, we will begin. Good afternoon, everybody. This is a special meeting of the Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee. It is a follow-up to the inquiry which the committee held in 2009 into press standards, privacy and libel, during which we took evidence on the extent of phone hacking which had taken place in the news of the world. In our report last year, we stated that we thought it was inconceivable that only one reporter had been involved. In the last few weeks, it has emerged that not only evidence has come out which I think has vindicated the committee's conclusion, but also abuses have been revealed which have angered and shocked the entire country. It's also clear that Parliament has been misled. We are very conscious on the committee that there is an ongoing police investigation and possible criminal proceedings to follow, and this committee would not wish to jeopardise that. However, we are encouraged by the statements that have been made by all the witnesses this afternoon that they wish to cooperate with the committee and help us to establish the truth. So, as our first witnesses this afternoon, can I welcome the Chairman and Chief Executive Officer of News Corp, Rupert Murdoch, and the Deputy Chief Operating Officer and Chairman and Chief Executive of News Corp International, James Murdoch. Can I also thank you for making yourselves available to the committee this afternoon?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're more than prepared to.
Thank you. Perhaps I might start with Mr. James Murdoch. You made a statement on the 7th of July in which you stated that the paper had made statements to Parliament without being in the full possession of the facts, and that was wrong. You essentially admitted that Parliament had been misled in what we had been told. Can you tell us to what extent were we misled and when you became aware of that?
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. And first of all, I would like to say as well just how sorry I am and how sorry we are to particularly the victims of illegal voicemail interceptions and to their families. It's a matter of great regret of mine, my father's, and everyone at News Corporation. And these are standards, these actions do not live up to the standards that our company aspires to everywhere around the world. And it is our determination to both put things right, make sure these things don't happen again, and to be the company that I know we have always aspired to be. As for my comments, Mr. Chairman, or my statement, which I believe was around the closure of the News of the World newspaper.
Before you get to that, I would just like to say one sentence. This is the most humble day of my life.
Okay, thank you.
The statement around the closure of the News of the World newspaper, where I stated that that the company had not been in full possession of the facts when certain statements were made to this committee, was referring to the emergence of new facts, largely that came about at the end of 2010 as the due process of a number of civil trials reached their point where document disclosure and evidence disclosure made it apparent to the company and to myself at that time that indeed there was reason to believe that potentially more people had been involved in the News of the World illegal voicemail interceptions from before. that was new evidence or new information at the time that postdated the 2009 hearings. And that is what I was referring to. Subsequent to our discovery of that information in one of the civil trials at the end of 2010, which I believe was the Sienna Miller case, civil trial around illegal voicemail interceptions, the company immediately went to look at additional records around the individual involved. The company alerted the police, who restarted on that basis the investigation that is now underway. And since then, the company has admitted liability to victims of illegal voicemail interceptions, has apologized unreservedly, which I repeat today, to those victims. And the company also set up a compensation scheme independently managed by a former high court judge to be able to deal with legitimate claims coming from victims of those terrible incidents of voicemail interceptions. And those are the actions that were taken as soon as the new evidence emerged. So when I made the statement about not being in the full possession of the facts, it was that those facts at that point were still in the future, and it was in the due process of that civil trial, or the civil litigation process, that evidence really emerged for us, and we acted, and the company acted as swiftly and as transparently as possible.
When this committee took evidence in 2009, we heard from the managing editor of News of the World, Stuart Kuttner, the legal manager of News International, Tom Crone, the News of the World editor, Colin Myler, the former editor, Andy Coulson, and Les Hinton, former chairman of News International. All of them told us that there had been a thorough investigation. No evidence had ever been found that anybody else was involved. That clearly was not correct. Were any of them lying to this committee?
Mr. Chairman, the company relied on three things throughout for a period of time up until the new evidence emerged. The company relied on a police investigation in 2007, and this is before, I'll recount this to try to take us back to that area. This is before I was involved. I became back involved in News Corporation and News International Matters at the end of 2007. In the 2007 period, there was a police investigation. Successful prosecutions were brought against two individuals, and the editor of the News of the World resigned. And the company relied on both the police having closed the investigation and repeated assertions that there was no new evidence for them to reopen their investigation. The company relied on the PCC, which had had a report and had said that there was nothing more to this at the time. And the company relied on the legal opinion of outside counsel that was brought in related to those matters, who, with respect to their review, had issued a clear opinion that there was no additional illegality other than the two individuals involved before. And the company relied on those facts. And for the company in 2008 and 2009, it was not clear that there was a reason to believe that those matters were anything other than settled matters and in the past.
So is it your testimony to this committee that the individuals who gave us evidence in 2009, none of them knew at that time what had been going on?
I do not have direct knowledge of what they knew and at what time, but I can tell you that the critical new facts, as I saw them and as the company saw them, really emerged in the production of documentary information or evidence in the civil trials at the end of 2010. And the duration from 2008 or 2007, I should say, to the end of 2010, and the length of time it took for that to come clear and for that real evidence to be there is a matter of deep frustration. Mine, I have to tell you, I know and I sympathize with the frustration of this committee, and it's a matter of real regret that the facts could not emerge and could not be gotten to my understanding, faster.
Well, you've made clear that it is the case that the information we were given was incorrect. Have you established who, as well as Clive Goodman, was involved in phone hacking in the News of the World?
I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, could you repeat that?
Who, as well as Clive Goodman, was involved in phone hacking in the News of the World?
As I think you made it clear earlier, Mr. Chairman, that there have been a number of arrests of former News of the World employees. These are matters for current criminal investigations, and I think it's difficult for me to comment in particular around some of those individuals.
Have you carried out your own investigation since the discovery of this information to find out the extent of involvement in phone hacking in the News of the World? We have
established a group in the company cooperating very closely with the police on their investigation. Their investigation is broad with respect to journalistic practices, and in particular journalistic practices at the News of the World. And the policy and the direction that the company has given them is to cooperate fully and transparently with the police, to provide information and evidence that the company believes and they believe is relevant to those investigations, sometimes proactively, sometimes in response to those requests. And again, I think the very fact that the provision of the new information to the police in the first place when there was no police investigation ongoing that then led to, in part, the reopening of, or this new investigation being established, I hope can be testament to some proactive action and transparency with respect to getting to the right place in terms of finding out the facts of what happened, understanding all of the allegations that are coming in, and moving forward to aid the police in the successful completion of the important and serious work that they're doing.
Okay. And the departure from your company in the recent few days of Tom Crone, of Rebecca Brooks, and of Les Hinton, is that because any of them had knowledge of phone hacking?
I have no knowledge, and there is no evidence that I'm aware of that Mrs. Brooks or Mr. Hinton or any of those executives had knowledge of that, and their assertions, certainly Mrs. Brooks, and assertions to me of her knowledge of those things has been clear. Nonetheless, those resignations have been accepted, but it's important, on the basis that there is no evidence today that I have seen or that I have any knowledge of that there was any impropriety by them.
I'm going to turn to Tom Watson.
Mr. Murdoch Senior, good afternoon, sir. You have repeatedly stated that News Corps has a zero tolerance to wrongdoing by employees. Is that right?
Yes.
In October 2010, did you still believe it to be true when you made your Thatcher speech and you said, "Let me be clear, we will vigorously pursue the truth and we will not tolerate wrongdoing"?
Yes.
So if you were not lying then, somebody lied to you. Who was it?
I don't know. That is what the police are investigating and we're helping them with.
But you acknowledge that you were misled?
Clearly.
Can I take you back to 2003? Are you aware that in March of that year, Rebecca Brooks gave evidence to this committee admitting paying police?
I am now aware of that. I was not aware at the time. I'm also aware that she amended that considerably very quickly afterwards.
I think she amended it 7 or 8 years afterwards. But did you or anyone else?
Sorry.
Did you or anyone else at your organisation investigate this at the time?
No.
Can you explain why?
I didn't know of it. I'm sorry. If I can just say something, and this is not as an excuse, maybe it's an explanation of my laxity. The News of the World is less than 1% of our company. I employ 53,000 people around the world who are proud and great and ethical and distinguished people, professionals in their life, and perhaps I'm spread watching and appointing people whom I trust to run those divisions.
Mr. Murdoch, I do accept that you have many distinguished people who work for your company. You are ultimately responsible for the corporate governance of News Corp. So what I'm trying to establish is who knew about wrongdoing and what was involved at the time. So if I can take you forward to 2006, when Clive Goodman was arrested and subsequently convicted of intercepting voicemails, were you made aware of that?
I think so. I was certainly made aware of when they were convicted.
And what did News International do subsequent to the arrest of Clive Goodman and Glenn Mulcair to get to the facts?
We worked with the police on further investigation, and eventually we appointed, I think very quickly appointed, a very leading firm of lawyers in the city to investigate it further.
Perhaps I could help you.
I'll come to you. I'll come to you in a minute. I'll just let me finish my line of questioning, and I'll come to you. What did you personally do to investigate that after Mr. Goodman went to prison? You were obviously concerned about it.
I spoke to Mr. Hinton, who told me about it.
Okay. Can I ask, in 2008, another 2 years, why did you not dismiss News of the World chief reporter Neville Thirlbeck following the Mosley case?
I'd never heard of him.
Okay. Despite a judge making clear that Thirlbeck set out to blame two of the women involved?
I didn't hear that.
A judge made it clear that Thirlbeck set out to blackmail two of the women involved in the case.
That is the first I've heard of that.
So none of your UK staff draw your attention to this serious wrongdoing, even though the case received widespread media attention?
I think my son can perhaps answer that in more detail. He was a lot closer to it.
I'll come to your son in a minute. So despite the fact that blackmail can result in a 14-year prison sentence, nobody in your UK company brought this fact to your attention?
The blackmail charge, no.
Do you think that might be because they knew you would think nothing of it?
No. I can't answer. I don't know.
Do you agree with Mr. Justice Eadie when he said that the lack of action discloses a remarkable state of affairs at News International?
No.
Mr. Murdoch, a judge found a chief reporter guilty of blackmail. It was widely reported. He says it was a remarkable state of affairs.
Why didn't he put him in jail?
Because it was a civil case. Were you aware that News International commissioned an investigation into News International emails by Harbottle and Lewis?
Was I
aware that News International commissioned an investigation into News International emails by the solicitors firm Harbottle and Lewis?
Yes, I didn't appoint them, but I was told of it happening.
You claimed in the Wall Street Journal that Harbottle and Lewis had made a major mistake. Can I ask what mistake you were referring to?
I think maybe that's a question again for James, but there was certainly, when we re-examined that, we found things which we immediately went to counsel with to get advice on how to present it to the police.
In their written response to this committee's questions, are you aware that News International stated that both John Chapman and Daniel Cloak reviewed these emails before forwarding them to Harbottle and Lewis?
No.
So that nobody in the company told you that two of your executives had reviewed the emails back
I
then?
thought that I was under the understanding that everything had been sent to them.
Okay. You are aware that Lord MacDonald QC has since reviewed the emails again on behalf of News International, are you not?
Yes.
You're aware that he stated he found evidence
and he's reported to the whole board of News,
he did.
News Corporation.
And you're aware that he stated to the board that he found evidence of indirect hacking, breaches of national security, and evidence of serious crime in the Harbottle and Lewis file?
Oh, he did indeed.
Mr. Watson, please, I can address these in some detail if you would allow me.
I will come to you, Mr. Murdoch, but it's your father who's responsible for corporate governance. I'd like to ask what he knew, but I will come back to you. Who was aware of Harbottle and Lewis' findings at News International?
He went to the senior officials of News Corp. Certainly the top legal officer.
So Tom Crone or Les Hinton?
No.
No. Were you informed about them?
They were not the top legal officers.
Who are the top legal officers?
You can answer that.
Mr. John Chapman was the top legal officer at News International, and Mr. Crone was the head of legal affairs at News Group Newspapers.
And were you informed about the findings by your son, Mr. Murdoch, or by Rebecca Brooks?
I forget, but I expect it was my son. I was in daily contact with them both.
Okay. When were you informed about the payments made to Gordon Taylor and Max Clifford?
Nope.
You were not informed?
Nope.
At no point you knew that Taylor and Clifford were made payments as a
I never
result?
heard
Okay.
the first one.
You never informed the Chief Executive of News Corp that you authorised payment of £500,000?
Would you like me to answer the questions now, Mr. Watson?
I'd like you to tell me whether you informed your father that you had authorised payment to Gordon Taylor as a result of him being a victim of a crime.
The settlement with Mr. Taylor, and I'm happy to address the matter of Mr. Taylor in some detail if you would like.
First, could you just let me know?
My father became aware after the settlement was made in 2009, I believe, after the confidential settlement had become public, as a newspaper reported on the out-of-court settlement afterwards. But please understand that the settlement of an out-of-court settlement of a civil claim of that nature and with that of that quantum is something that normally in a company our size, the responsible executives in the territory, in the country, would be authorized to make, and that's the way the company has functioned, and it's below the approval thresholds, if you will, that would have to go to my father as chairman and chief executive of the global company.
There are other questions I could ask on this, but there are other colleagues who have specific questions to you, Mr. Murdoch, about this issue, so I'll move back to your father if I can. Mr. Murdoch, at what point did you find out that criminality was endemic at News of the World?
Endemic is a very wide-ranging word, and I also had to be extremely careful not to prejudice the course of justice which is taking place now. That has been disclosed. I became aware as it became apparent. The first two, and then I was absolutely shocked, appalled and ashamed when I heard about the $1 million case only 2 weeks ago, 8 days before I saw that it was graciously received by the Davies.
Did you read our last report into the matter where we referred to the collective amnesia of your executives who gave evidence to our committee?
I haven't heard that, but
Nobody brought
I
it
don't
to your
know who made
attention.
that particular charge, but it's
So a parliamentary inquiry found your senior executives in the UK guilty of collective amnesia, and nobody brought it to your attention. I don't see why you think that's not very serious.
yes, but you're really not saying amnesia. You're really saying lying.
Well, we found your executives guilty of collective amnesia. I would have thought that someone would like to bring that to your attention, that it would concern you. Did they forget?
No.
Okay. Whilst it has been obvious to most observers from the summer of 2009 that phone hacking was widespread, you knew for sure in January of this year that the one rogue reporter line was false. Is that right?
forget the date.
Why was Edmondson the only person to leave News of the World last January?
Mr. Watson, we have given all our files and all our knowledge and everything to the police. They have not given us the Mulcair diaries, so we do not know what was in that. And that there was a page which appeared to be addressed to him. But again, that's my son's.
Mr. Watson, perhaps it would be, and Mr. Chairman, perhaps it would be helpful to the committee if you would like to go through any of the particular detail around why decisions were made by the management team at News International and the precise chronology. It would be more helpful, perhaps, if I could answer those questions as the chief executive of the regional businesses across Europe. I have somewhat more proximity to it.
I understand the detailed points.
I'm simply offering to help to clarify these matters, Mr.
Your
Watson.
father is responsible for corporate governance, and serious wrongdoing has been brought about in the company, and it's revealing in itself what he doesn't know and what executive chose not to tell him. So with respect to you, I will pursue my line of questioning and come back to you later. Mr. Murdoch, why was no one fired in April when News International finally admitted that News of the World had been engaged in criminal interception of voicemails?
It was not our job to get in the course of justice. It was up to the police to bring those charges and to carry out their investigation, which we were 100% cooperating with.
But in April, the company admitted liability for phone hacking, and nobody took responsibility for it then. No one was fired. The company admitted that they'd been involved in criminal wrongdoing, and no one was fired. Why was that?
There were people in the company which apparently were guilty, and we have to find them and we have to deal with them appropriately.
Mr. Watson, if I can clarify, most of the individuals involved or implicated in the allegations that were there had long since left the company. Some that were still there, you mentioned one, exited the business as soon as evidence of wrongdoing was found, and a process was set up in cooperation with the police to aid them with any of those things that they wanted to do. But many of the individuals that were potentially implicated in those civil litigations and potentially in these criminal matters had already left the building and were not in the News of the World at this time. And current News of the World, or News of the World executives and journalists at the time, many of whom were not there in 2006 and 2007. So it was that some of them had already left.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Mr. Murdoch, why did you decide to risk the jobs of 200 people before pointing the finger at those responsible for running the company at the time of the illegality? Your son and Rebecca Brooks.
When a company closes down, it is natural for people to lose their jobs. We have, in this case, and are making this continuing, every effort to see that those people are employed in other divisions of the company if they're not part of the small group, or I don't know how big the group, whatever group was involved in criminality.
Did you close it because of the criminality? Did you close the paper down because of the criminality?
Yes, we felt ashamed of what had happened and thought we were going to bring it to a close.
People lied to you and lied to their readers.
We had broken our trust with our readers. Certainly broken with me, but it was the important point was we had broken our trust with our readers.
Are you aware that there are other forms of illicit surveillance being used by private investigators that were used by News International?
Other forms of
illicit surveillance, computer hacking, tracking on cars?
No.
If the evidence is produced...
I think all news organisations have used private detectives and do so in their investigations from time to time. I don't think illegally.
If it could be shown to you that private investigators working for newspapers in News International used other forms of illicit surveillance like computer hacking, would you immediately introduce another investigation?
He said that could be up to the police, but we would certainly work with the police. If they wanted us to do it, we would do it. Or if they wanted to do it, they would do it.
Finally, can I first ask you, when did you first meet Mr. Alex Maranchek?
Mr.
Alex Maranchek.
I don't think I ever.
He worked for the company for 25 years, started as a crime reporter.
I don't remember meeting him. I might have shaken hands walking through the office, but I don't have any memory.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Jim Sheridan.
Thank you, Chair. And again, Mr. Murdoch Senior, can I ask you, I have a number of short questions for you. Why did you enter the back door at number 10 when you visited the Prime Minister following the last general election?
Because I was asked to.
You were asked to go in the back door of number 10.
Yes.
Why would that be?
To avoid photographers in the front. I imagine. I don't know. I was asked. I just did what I was told.
It's strange that given heads of state managed to go in the front door.
Yes.
Yet you have to go in the back door.
Yes. That's the choice of the Prime Minister or their staff or whoever do these things.
So was it under the Prime Minister's direct instructions that you come in the back door?
I was asked would I please come in through the back door.
I don't think my father would have any direct knowledge of the arrangements that were being made for his entry or exit from a particular building, Mr. Sheridan, respectfully.
Okay. Again, Mr. Murdoch, have you ever imposed any preconditions?
Which visit to Downing Street are you talking about?
It was just following the last general election.
I was invited within days to have a cup of tea to be thanked for the support by Mr. Cameron. No other conversation took place.
And that's
it lasted minutes.
And that's the one you went in through the back door?
Yes. I had been asked also by Mr. Brown many times.
Through the back door?
Yes.
Can I also ask you, Mr. Murdoch?
And my family who went there many times.
Have you ever imposed any preconditions upon a party leader in the UK before giving them the support of your newspapers?
I've never guaranteed anyone the support of our newspapers. We had been supporting the Thatcher government and the Conservative government that followed, and we felt it had got tired, and we changed and supported the Labour Party, whenever it was, 13 years ago, with the direct loss of 200,000 circulation.
Did you ever impose any preconditions on either the Labour Party
No.
or Conservative Party? No preconditions whatsoever?
No, the only conversations I'd had with them, with Mr. Blair that I can remember, were arguing about the euro.
Well, Mr. Blair visited you halfway around the world.
He what?
Mr. Blair visited you halfway around the world
He.
before the 1997 election. Anyway, that doesn't matter.
That was something that Mr. Cameron arranged. Mr. Campbell.
Can I also ask you, it is understood that the FBI are investigating 9/11 victims. Have you commissioned an investigation into these allegations?
We have seen no evidence of that at all, and as far as we know, the FBI haven't either. If they do, we will treat it exactly the same way as we treat it here, and I cannot believe it happened from anyone in America, whether someone at the News of the World or Mr. Mulcair took it on himself to do it, I don't know. It was certainly unnecessary since everybody...
If I can go back to, I'll come back to you, James, in a minute. But I just want to clarify, is that if these allegations are anyway true whatsoever, will you commission an investigation into them?
Absolutely.
Okay. Also, you must be horrified by the scandal and the fact that it's cost you the Sky B transaction and led to the closure of the News of the World. Who do you blame for that?
Well, a lot of people had different agendas, I think, in trying to build this hysteria. All our competitors in this country formally announced a consortium to try and stop us, and they caught us with dirty hands, and they built hysteria around it.
But I think it's...
So is it it was the competitors that that stopped you getting?
No, I think a mood developed which made it really impractical to go ahead.
Mr. Sheridan, we have been very clear that serious allegations of wrongdoing have been leveled about the News of the World, and we believed that the News of the World, the actions of some reporters and people some years ago have fundamentally tarnished the trust that the News of the World had with its readers. And this is a matter of huge and sincere regret of mine, my father's, and the company's. The company's priority, very much so, is to restore that trust, is to operate in the right way. It's to make sure that the company can be the company that it has always aspired to be, and the removal of the offer to make the proposal to make an offer to the BSkyB shareholders who are not News Corporation is simply a reflection of that priority of moving forward.
Well, I have every sympathy with what you're saying, but do you understand that people who have been the victims of the News of the World based on allegations will find that a bit strange?
And it is our absolute priority to, with those. What happened at the News of the World was wrong. We and I have apologized profusely and unreservedly for that, and my father has as well.
Okay.
These are very, very serious matters, and we are trying to establish the facts of any new allegations as they come up. We are working closely with the police to find out where the wrongdoing was and to hold people accountable. And I think importantly as well, to the victims of illegal voicemail interceptions, not just have we apologized, but we have admitted liability. The company has admitted liability, and we have set up the appropriate third-party compensation schemes to do that. Okay. These are all matters that we are fully engaged in.
If I can just return to your father, I know that's a very stressful time for yourselves, but Mr. Murdoch, do you accept that ultimately you are responsible for this whole fiasco?
No.
You're not responsible. Who is responsible?
The people that I trusted to run it, and then maybe the people they trusted.
Can you name
I
people?
worked with Mr. Hinton for 52 years, and I would trust him with my life.
Are you satisfied that the cash payments that were made by the News Corporation companies to informants for stories were registered with the appropriate tax authorities?
I don't know anything about that. Perhaps
If people were given
James
money,
would answer.
if people were given money in order to accomplish stories,
People were given money to.
in order to get stories, was that? Did you notify the appropriate tax authorities about this?
All of our financial affairs and are, as a public company, are transparent, are audited. The tax jurisdictions that the company works in all around the world are worked with transparently and thoroughly. Tax compliance is an important priority for any business, and we comply, and the company complies with the laws.
Would that also include people who are in regular monthly retainers registering their affairs with HMRC?
I can't speak. I have no knowledge of separate people on retainers of the company and their own tax affairs or their own tax arrangements. I can speak for the company's tax arrangements, and to the best of my knowledge, we are a company that takes tax compliance, regulatory compliance, financial and regulatory transparency hugely seriously, and it's something that we're very proud of.
Now, turning,
We all start these questions in more detail.
can I just turn to James, and you'll be aware of the situation regarding Tommy Sheridan, the former MSP who's currently in prison. Bob Bird, whether deliberately or inadvertently, misled the jury in Tommy Sheridan's perjury trial. Your company has not disclosed the internal emails that may aid the appeal of Mr. Sheridan. Why is that?
I don't have direct knowledge of that, Mr. Sheridan. I apologize. But certainly if you have additional questions on that in the future, I'm happy to supply written answers, but I don't have direct knowledge and I'm not in a position to answer those questions.
Just a couple more questions, Chair. James, could you please confirm or deny whether any News Corporation company is the subject of an investigation by the Serious Fraud Office?
I have no knowledge of that. I have no knowledge of that at this point.
And could you also confirm or deny whether any News Corporation company is the subject of an investigation by the Financial Services Authority?
I don't believe so, but not to my knowledge.
And finally, please confirm or deny whether any News Corporation company is a subject of an investigation by HMRC?
Not to my knowledge. We have ongoing dialogue with the HMRC and the various subsidiaries here, but as far as investigations are concerned, I have no knowledge of one.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thérèse Coffey.
Thank you. Mr. Murdoch, who made the recommendation to close down News of the World to the board of News Corp?
Did I?
Who made the recommendation to close down the News of the World? I assume it was a board decision that was made by News Corp.
It was the result of a discussion between my son and I and senior executives and Ms. Brooks. One morning, we called the board of News Corporation, the whole board, to seek their agreement.
You've already suggested it's because you felt ashamed. It's not a suggestion that it was a commercial decision to decide to close the News of the World?
Far from it.
Okay. And, moving on to that. Moving on to the financial governance arrangements within News Corp. Mr. James Murdoch, you suggested earlier that the payments to Mr. Taylor were not notified at News Corp level because of the finance threshold. Could you tell us a bit more about that? I understand it took you had to agree for the payment to Mr. Taylor. Could you tell us a bit more? Was that financial level or managerial decision?
It was I'm very happy to discuss, and thank you. It's a good question. I'm very happy to discuss the matter of Mr. Taylor. The out-of-court settlement with Mr. Taylor was related to a voicemail interception that had occurred previously and was actually one of the counts, as I understand it, of the 2007 trial of Mr. Mulcair. So it's important to think back to 2008 to understand what we knew then, what I knew then, and what the information was in the context. So it was the underlying interception was not a disputed fact. Secondly, it was the advice, and further to that I should say, it was the advice and the clear view of the company that if litigated, that the company would lose that case, that it was almost certain to lose that case because the underlying fact was not in dispute. Thirdly, the company sought distinguished outside counsel to understand if the case were litigated and if it were to be lost, which was the great likelihood, what the financial quantum would be or what that would cost the company. And it was advised that with expenses, legal expenses and damages, that could be between $500,000 and £1 million or thereabouts. I don't recall the exact number of the advice. I think it was $250,000 plus expenses plus litigation costs, something like that. And lastly, this was in a context in the first half of 2008, and this was my first real involvement with any of these issues, where there was no reason at the time to believe that the issue of these voicemail interceptions was anything but a settled matter, and that it was in the past after the successful prosecution of the two individuals we discussed, as well as the resignation of the editor. So the settlement, the out-of-court settlement, was made in that context, and it was within the authorities, as I understood it, of News International to be able to make those out-of-court settlements in due course without going to the global level company. I, at the time, was the regional head for Europe and Asia of News Corporation, and I directed that it was all right to settle that, but did not get involved in any of the negotiations directly about that settlement. But I do, recall in 2008 that those are the things that were known.
I just add, my son had only been with the company for a matter of a very few weeks.
for clarity, it was a few months, but it was. I'd come back to the company at the end of 2007, in the middle of December, and this was sometime, I don't recall the exact date, but sometime in the first half of 2008.
So, given you were new to the company, weeks, months, I don't want to have a father-son argument about that. What level of financial payments could other News International executives sanction, people like Colin Myler or Tom Crone or Rebecca Brooks, without recourse to you as the chairman?
Generally speaking, the way the company will operate, as any company will operate, is within certain financial parameters from a financial planning perspective. We will look at a budget for a year, much like a house will manage its budget and say how much money do we have to spend and how much money does a particular company or part of the company or department have to spend, and as long as they stay within those guidelines, the belief is that they should be empowered to make those judgments, to spend those monies and achieve the ends that they can. I don't have at the tip of my fingers the precise financial authorities in that, but I can discuss after the committee hearing with you what exactly you'd like to know, and we can discuss whether or not it's right to come back to you with that.
What would it have taken? What level of financial payout would it have taken to require an authorisation from the board of News Corp?
Oh, I think for the full board, it's in some millions, but I don't know the exact answer there.
Do you know how much has been paid out to people authorised by your executives?
Paid out in what way, Dr. Coffey?
Paid out as settlements.
Settlements for legal settlements. I do not know the total. I do not know the total number. But around the world, it's customary to reach out-of-court settlements in civil litigations and civil matters, and it's something that, rather than go through the lengthy and sometimes expensive litigation process with the risk that often entails, it's customary to try to reach out-of-court settlements in many cases.
I should just add that we have a very strong audit committee at News Corporation, which would know about this and have this. Neither of us are members of that. They are outside directors, and they review all these things.
Thank you. Building on that then, how is it possible to make payments to people if they don't invoice you or they're not employee of News Corp subsidiaries?
I'm sorry, Dr. Coffey.
How is it possible to transfer cash or some other form of remuneration to people who don't invoice you or who are not employees of News Corp subsidiaries?
Look, I cannot. I don't know the exact arrangements of that. I don't do that myself. But to tell you how that's done. But sometimes, in certain instances, it is appropriate for journalists or managers in a certain environment to have the ability to use cash in some instances. But it is customary for them to record those, and all of the expenses, cash expenses as well as invoice expenses should be looked at and recorded.
So things like use of petty cash could be quite big sums of money or small. At the moment, you don't necessarily. You just record that the journalist gave it to somebody.
Yeah, and I don't, and I don't have direct knowledge of all of those arrangements.
Okay. I was going to ask if payments could have been made to family members of those alleged to have been hacked and similar, but is it possible other forms of remuneration can be used in your company apart from cash and bank transfers? Talking things like travellers' cheques, vouchers, things that can be redeemed for cash.
I don't have knowledge of that.
And just looking at some of your corporate governance, your page 2 and page 4 of your own code, it talks about directors, employees and officers of News Corporation acting to the principles set forth, including consultants, agents, suppliers and business partners to adhere to the standards. We'd never ask a third party to form any act that would violate these standards. Can you tell me more a little bit, especially on the financial side, how you as an organisation try and make that happen?
How we work is that each newspaper has a editorial manager. The titles vary, but they have to approve the expense claims of every reporter. The reporter has no authority to pay money on his own.
And
So the managing editor's office often manages a lot of the expenses and budgets, and should do so, and is directed to do so with propriety.
do you require your executives to make annual statements that they've abided with your codes of conduct and ethics? I used to work for a family-owned company.
Every employee, every colleague around the world of News Corporation receives the code of conduct, a set of it's a pamphlet that has some detail in it, but it's not too much, so that people read it. With respect to what ethical conduct is required.
Available to you.
Very happy to make it available to you. It's about ethical conduct, it's about the law, breaking the rules, and so on. And everyone who becomes an employee is required to do that. And our legal counsel internally also conducts workshops around the world with staff from Mumbai to Manchester around those rules and that code of conduct. And it's something that we try very hard to communicate as crisply as we can to everyone in the business.
And finally, and I appreciate Mr. Murdoch's statement at the beginning, given you've been in the media spotlight, and perhaps I expect not appreciated the attention that you've had, without wishing to suppress investigative journalism, will this make you think again about how you approach your headlines, your targets and future? You know, that could be people from the Hillsborough 96 to other celebrities or others. Will you think again about what your headlines will say in future?
I think all our editors certainly will, and I'm not aware of any transgressions. It's a matter of taste. It's a very difficult issue. We have in this country a wonderful variety of voices, and they are naturally very competitive. And I'm sure there are headlines which occasionally give offence, but it's not intentional.
Mr. James?
I think it's important just to say one of the lessons, if you will, from all of this for us is really that we do need to think, I think, as a business as well as an industry in this country more forcefully and more thoughtfully about our journalistic ethics, about what exactly the codes of conduct should be, not just for News International, our UK publishing subsidiary, but also for the industry as a whole, and what sort of governance should be around this whole area. And we welcomed last week the Prime Minister's announcement of a judicial inquiry into both journalistic ethics, but also relationships, as I understand it, with the police and with politicians and things like that. And I think that's a really good thing for the country and for all of the interested parties to engage with fully. And one of the specific actions that we've taken to try to be as proactive as we can around this is we've actually set up something that we call the Management and Standards Committee that is outside of the actual management of our publishing company and reports to the independent directors or through the independent directors of our global public board, precisely to look at this issue around first the specific issues, how we cooperate with the investigations, how we deal with allegations of wrongdoing and get to the bottom of it, but also, and I think importantly, how we coordinate and cooperate and really proactively engage with those judicial inquiries, and how we start to set a code of conduct and a code of ethics that we think and that it thinks is something that can both be a paragon for all of our newspapers, but all of the industry, but also something that really has teeth and can hold the company to account. And it's independently chaired, this Management and Standards Committee, and we think it's going to be a much better way to go in the future. And we'd like over the next 6 months and years to really be judged on the actions that the company takes to put that right and to put that in place.
Thank you.
I'd just like to say, if I may, that it doesn't take away at all from what we've been saying about our apologies or outlining for anything. But this country does greatly benefit from having a competitive press and therefore having a very transparent society. That is sometimes very inconvenient to people. But I think we're better and stronger for it.
Before I bring in my next colleague, can I just come back to something Thérèse Coffey raised, which was the closer of the news of the world. Can I ask you, is it your intention to launch a new Sunday tabloid newspaper?
No, we've
made no decision on that.
There's no decision on that.
So, for the moment, there are no plans to have a News International title coming out on Sunday at the tabloid end of the market?
There are no immediate plans for that.
So speculation
that we want.
I mean, we've talked in the past about moving to 7-day newsrooms. There was speculation that the title of the Sun on Sunday had been reserved. All of that is.
I think some of the. I think we leave all those options open. That is not the company's priority now. In the last week, it has come up in the company, but my father's direction and my direction is to say that this is not the time to be worrying about that. The company has to move forward on all of these other actions and really get to grips with the facts of these allegations and understand them as fully as we can.
Okay. Can I appeal both to the witnesses and indeed to members to try and keep brief, because we still have quite a lot to get through. Adrian Sanders.
Good afternoon. In your statement of 7th of July 2011 to James Murdoch, you said that the company paid out-of-court settlements approved by me. I did not have a complete picture when I did so. What do you know now that you did not know then?
I think essentially the new information that emerged that is critical here is the information that came out of the ongoing process of civil litigations in 2010. And at the end of 2010, the presentation of evidence, which had not been in our possession previously from this civil litigation, that widened the circle definitively, or at least made it very apparent that this was very likely, that the circle was wider than the two individuals, Mr. Goodman and Mr. Mulcair, from previously. And it was that information that was really critical. And if I can go back to my previous testimony just earlier today around the settlement with Mr. Taylor, the commercial and legal rationale, if you will, around that settlement was very, very clear, which was that this underlying fact was not in dispute and was a known fact from a previous trial. The advice was very, very clear as to what sort of damages could be expected to be paid, and it was quite clear and quite likely that if litigated, the company would lose that case. And in the context of none of this other information, this is a full year before some of the new allegations in the press arose from afar. So this is there was no reason to believe at the time that it was anything other than in the past. Now, so knowing then what I know now, would I have still directed to negotiate to settle that case? I would, actually, but I would have coupled it with the other actions that we've taken since the new evidence emerged at the end of September 2010. And that is to immediately go and look at whatever we could find internally around the individuals involved, to immediately contact the police about what they about information that may be of great interest to them, to put in place the process, which took a little while, and we did it, I think, in the early part of 2011, around admitting liability to the civil litigants, putting a process in place to get to the bottom of what legitimate allegations there were, apologizing unreservedly to the victims of those illegal voicemail intercepts, which were absolutely inexcusable, and having a system of compensation there. So I think if I knew then what we know now, and with the benefit of hindsight, we can look at all these things, but if I knew then what we know now, we would have taken more action around that and moved faster to get to the bottom of these allegations.
Were the settlements paid by News International, News Corp or News Group newspapers?
I don't I don't recall. I would imagine it was either News International or News Group newspapers. I think News Group newspapers, but I'm sure we can provide you with that information.
What advice did Tom Crone and Colin Myler give you in relation to the payment to Gordon Taylor?
The advice from Mr. Myler and Mr. Crone was as I have described it, which was that the underlying fact in the case was a known fact, was a previous fact, had come up in the trial of Mr. Mulcair.
But were you aware the case involved the criminal act of phone hacking?
Pardon me, sorry?
Were you aware the case involved the criminal act of phone hacking?
That was my understanding, that was what the litigation was for damages for the illegal voicemail interception.
So when did you get this advice?
This was in the first half of 2008.
In 2009, Mr. Crone and Mr. Myler informed us that they decided to settle Mr. Taylor's claim based upon the advice received from the company's external legal advisors. Was this advice received from Farrer & Co. solicitors?
Farrer & Co. has done work for us. I don't know precisely which external counsel they engaged on that, but I can clarify that.
Did you see the advice, whether it was from Farrer & Co. or from anyone else?
No, the advice that I had was oral from Mr. Myler and Mr. Crone.
And what was their advice?
It is as I described it.
Simply to settle.
And that outside legal advice had been taken with respect to the quantum of damages that were expected, that their advice was that the case would be lost, and that their advice was that in the absence of any new evidence, certainly no new evidence was made aware to me, in the absence of any new evidence from this was simply a matter that was to do with events that had come to the light in 2007 in the criminal trials before I was there, and that this was a matter in the past. And the police as well had closed their case and said there was no new evidence here. So the context of it was that it was about events that were a year or more old, about underlying activities prior to that, and that was where we were.
Was part of the advice given that the high payment would ensure the matter was kept confidential?
No, not at all. The confidential nature of an out-of-court settlement is a normal thing. I don't know of many out-of-court settlements that are not kept confidential. There are some, I'm sure, but so there was nothing about confidentiality. I think I understand where you're going with this, Mr. Sanders. But no, the amount paid and the advice there was resting on advice from outside counsel with respect to the amount that we would be expected to pay in damages, plus expenses and litigation costs.
Did you question why such high payments were made to Mr. Taylor and to Mr. Clifford? It suggested to be £700,000 and £1 million respectively for invasions of privacy, when the record amount of privacy damages awarded by a court remains £60,000, ironically against the News of the World.
Mr. Sanders, I did question the amount made, but not in relation to the $60,000. If you recall, as I'm sure you do, the chronology here, the settlement made with respect to the £60,000 against the News of the World, which I believe was the Mosley case, was after the authorization of the settlement and after the advice that we sought from senior distinguished outside counsel with respect to the quantum of damages that could be expected to pay, which in damages terms was £250,000 plus expenses and litigation costs was expected to be between £500,000 and £1 million is my recollection of it. And I think that chronology is important. I think it would afterwards you would have obviously had maybe different information, but it wasn't afterwards, it was before.
You have since said that when you approved the Taylor settlement you did not actually have all the facts. What do you know now that you did not know then?
As I've testified, Mr. Sanders, and respectfully, Mr. Chairman, the key facts, the key evidence that came to light at the end of 2010 as the lengthy due process of the civil litigations involving these matters took their course, it was that process that unearthed the key evidence there. And it was really only after that even that the police, that any said, they should restart the investigation. As soon as we had that new information at the end of 2010, which indicated to us that there was a wider involvement, we acted on it immediately.
Tom Crone said last week he did not know why he left News Group newspapers. Can you clarify why he was asked to leave after 26 years of service?
Well, last week the News of the World, 2 weeks ago, I guess, the News of the World published its last paper. Mr. Crone was very involved with the News of the World matters over the years, and but the company believed, and the management of the company believed, that it was time to part ways. I was not involved in those direct discussions with Mr. Crone, and I can't comment on their nature or their content. I don't have knowledge of them.
Okay, final couple of questions. The New Statesman carries a story last week that News International subsidised Andy Coulson's wages after he left your employ. Can you shed any light on that?
I have no knowledge of Andy Coulson's wages after he left the company's employment.
And finally, are you familiar with the term willful blindness?
Mr. Sanders, would you care to elaborate?
It is a term that came up in the Enron scandal. And willful blindness is a legal term. It states that if there is knowledge that you could have had and should have had but chose not to have, you are still responsible.
Mr. Sanders, do you have a question? Respectfully, I don't know what you'd like me to say.
Whether you were aware.
I'm not aware of that. I'm not aware of that particular phrase.
But now you are familiar with the term because I've explained it to you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Sanders.
I've heard the phrase before, and we were not ever guilty of that.
Thank you. Philip Davies.
As you, I'm not sure if you acknowledged it at the start or not, but certainly the chairman did, that when we had our inquiry in 2009, the evidence given by News International executives was rather hopeless, really. They came with a game plan. Their game plan was to tell us that they didn't know anything, they couldn't remember anything, and they didn't know anybody who would know anything. And I just wonder, just so we can get off on a reasonable footing, what sort of coaching you've had today and who's advised you on how to handle this session and what their advice was?
With respect to today, after scheduling this appearance, we took some advice around what the context of this sort of a setting. It's my first time, and my father's, I think, first time in a committee meeting like this. Mostly logistics and so on. What sort of questions we asked, but we were advised fundamentally to tell the truth and to come and be as open and transparent as possible. And that's my and my father's intent and intention. And we hope that we can show you that that's what's happening.
Mr. Murdoch, Senior, you, in answer to some questions from Mr. Watson, seemed to indicate that you had a rather hands-off approach to your company, that I think the point you made was that News of the World was less than 1% of your entire worldwide business, and so you wouldn't really be expected to know the ins and outs of what was going on. Could you just give us an illustration of how often you would speak to the editor of your newspapers, how often you'd speak to the editor of The Sun, for example, how often you'd speak to the editor of the News of the World?
Very seldom. Sometimes I would ring the editor of the News of the World on a Saturday night and say, have you got any news tonight? But it was just to keep in touch. I ring the editor of the Sunday Times nearly every Saturday. Not to influence what he has to say at all. And I'm very careful always to premise any remark I made to him saying, I'm just inquiring. I'm not really in touch. But I've got to tell you that I spend, if there's an editor that I spend most time with, is with the editor of the Wall Street Journal. And because I'm in the same building. But to say that we're hands off is wrong. I work a 10 or 12-hour day, and I cannot tell you the multitude of issues that I have to handle every day. The News of the World, perhaps I lost sight of, maybe because it was so small in the general frame of our company. But we're doing a lot of other things too.
I understand that, but if I can help you out here, if somebody had told me that you would speak to something like the editor of The Sun, or at least daily and maybe twice a day, would you recognise that description, or would that be...
No.
You wouldn't historically, traditionally have spoken to the editor of The Sun on that number of times?
No.
No. Okay.
I'd like to, but no.
So, when you speak, you said you speak to the editor of the News of the World, maybe on a Saturday night before the publication, not to influence what they have to say. Absolutely understand that. So, I'm just intrigued as to how these conversations go, because I would have imagined it would go something along the lines of, to the editor of the News of the World, anything to report, anything interesting going on. And the editor of the News of the World says, no, bit of standard week. We paid Gordon Taylor £600,000. Surely
He never said that last sentence.
Surely in your weekly conversations with the editor of the News of the World, something as big as that, paying somebody £1 million, paying somebody £700,000, surely you would have expected the editor of the News of the World just to drop it into the conversation at some point during your weekly chat.
No.
You wouldn't have expected them to say that to you.
No.
So what on earth?
Let me say, I didn't really call him weekly, but I would have called him at least once a month, I guess.
And what would you discuss with them? If things like that weren't on the agenda, what was on the agenda?
What's doing?
Sorry?
I'd say what's doing.
And what sort of response would you
We might
expect?
have to say we've got a great story exposing X or Y. Or he'd say more likely nothing special.
James, would you...
He might refer to the fact that there were how many extra pages they were devoted to the football that week.
But he wouldn't tell you about £1 million payoff. It's just interesting to somebody like me.
He would expect other people to tell me that, if anyone was to.
James, would you acknowledge then, in your view, that you overpaid Max Clifford and Gordon Taylor?
Well, I can't speak to the arrangements with Mr. Clifford, as I don't have direct knowledge in terms of I wasn't involved in those pieces in that piece. With respect to the Taylor piece, I made a judgment, given the advice of counsel, given the advice of the executives involved, that and going back and looking at what we knew in 2008 and looking at that advice, remembering that advice, and looking at the context at the time, if we step back those few years, 3 years now, it was a decision that given that context was a decision that I would still stand by. I think.
Well, it just seems a bit. It seems
certainly. I think the. Sorry,
Mr.
Davies. Sorry, you had another.
Apparently, there was a contract with Mr. Clifford, which was cancelled by Mr. Colson.
I don't know about that. I don't know if you have knowledge of that.
Okay.
Mr. Davies, sorry, you were going on.
Well, it just seems strange to me that.
I don't know what was in the contract.
No, we might ask you to come back to us. We might ask you to come back with details about that. But it seems odd to me as a layman that the £600,000, £1 million. Andy Gray had his phone hacked, and he hasn't got 600,000 or 500,000 or even 200,000 or even 50,000. He got 20,000. And it seems bizarre that somebody can have their phone hacked and get 20,000, and somebody else gets their phone hacked and they get 600,000 or 1 million. And surely you can see that the difference that most people draw is that one was when it was all out in the open and everybody knew about all of these things, Andy Gray, and the other one was paid when it was all trying to be kept rather quiet, 600,000. Do you not see that, to most people looking at that, it sort of smells a bit?
Mr. Davies, I understand. I understand where you're coming from here, and I understand how these are big sums of money. We're talking about 100,000, 200,000, 600,000. That's a lot of money. And you look at that and you say, why would a company do that? And I would go back to my answer to Mr. Sanders' question, which was just to be precise about the chronology here. really, and I'm not a lawyer, I apologize, but my understanding...
I got your answer to...
Mr. Davies, I'd like to answer this question, but my understanding is that the 60,000 settlement in the Mosley case, or the judgment in the Mosley case, which was after the advice given around the Gordon-Taylor settlement, is an important chronology, right? And that has now, and that's set, and courts and judges have set a different standard here. What we knew, and what I knew at the time, was that we had senior distinguished outside counsel who we had gone to say, if this case was litigated, and if we were to lose the case, if the company were to lose the case, what sort of damages would we expect to pay? And the company received an answer that was substantial.
The answer was 250,000, so you settled for 600. But that's we'll move on.
Mr. Davies, it's important to be clear, Mr. Davies. I apologise, but it is important to be clear. The 600,000 or 700,000 included damages, legal fees, and an estimation of what it would have cost otherwise, because the other side of the negotiation understands it. So it's damages plus costs that gets you to that number. It is important but respectfully, it is important to be clear about that, because I agree, they are big numbers.
No, absolutely. I want to concentrate on payments you made to your staff, as it happens. Going back to the trial of Glenn Mulcair and Clive Goodman. Clive Goodman was pleading guilty to phone hacking, a criminal offence. Did News International pay Clive Goodman's legal fees for his trial?
I was not. I do want to be clear about the chronology. First of all, I did not have first-hand knowledge of those times. Remember that my involvement in these matters was started in 2008, and in 2007. Up until December, I was wholly focused in my role as chief executive of a public company. I wasn't involved in those things.
Who would know?
But I can try to answer the first question first. To say that it is customary in certain instances with employees or with other with litigations to pay some set of legal expenses on behalf of those, to try to bring all of the evidence to a court and so on, and that's all been done in accordance with, since any involvement that I've had in any knowledge of this, in accordance with legal advice about what the proper way to do things was.
No.
But I can't speak to the 2007 arrangements. I don't have first-hand knowledge of those.
Again, I'll try and help out. Clive Goodman employed the services of a QC called John Kelsey Fry. Now, I don't know if you've ever come across John Kelsey Fry. I don't know if he's a lawyer that News International uses.
He's not known to me.
He's probably one of the most eminent lawyers in the country, certainly one of the most expensive lawyers in the country, and he's the sort of go-to lawyer for celebrities. I think Stephen Gerrard used him fairly recently. It seems odd to me that a journalist on the News of the World, who's pleading guilty here to a crime, uses in mitigation probably the most expensive lawyer in the country, which obviously leads most people to suspect that his legal fees were not being paid for by himself, but were being paid for by News International. Now, given that he was pleading guilty to a criminal act, phone hacking, which presumably leads to summary dismissal, gross misconduct, why on earth would News International even dream about paying the legal fees of somebody who was engaged in criminal activity and committed something that was clearly gross misconduct?
Mr. Davies, I don't have any direct knowledge of the specific legal arrangements with Mr. Goodman in 2007. So I cannot answer the specifics of that question. What I can say is that, because I've asked the question as well more recently than that, with respect to who the company pays legal fees, what contributions to legal fees do we make, does the company make, and so on and so forth. And I think I can tell you that, in asking the question, I have been surprised to learn that and this is legal counsel telling me this, that it is customary in here to sometimes make contributions to the legal costs of either co-defendants or defendants in related matters, and so on and so forth. I have no direct knowledge of that particular instance that you mentioned, and if you have any additional specific questions about that, perhaps Mr. Chairman, we can follow up with you on that, and I'm happy to do that.
Well, it's all very well, but I mean, these are issues that go back some time. I'm surprised you haven't followed up on them already. Were any payments made subsequently to Clive Goodman and Glenn Mulcair after their conviction? Did News International make any payments at all to those two people following their convictions?
Yeah. I'd like to answer that question. I think it's a good question, and it's a specific question. To my knowledge, upon asking, because there were allegations made that legal fees had been paid after that time in 2007 to those, I asked the question myself, and I was very surprised to find that the company had made certain contributions to legal settlements. I don't have all of the details around each of those, not legal settlements, sorry, legal fees around there, and I just, and I was surprised. I was very surprised to find out that had occurred.
Who authorized them?
They were done, as I understand it, in accordance with legal counsel, and the strong advice to.
No, I didn't say who advised it. Who signed it off? Who at News International agreed to make those? Who signed the checks? Who agreed to make those payments?
I do not know who signed off those.
I mean, we were talking about corporate governance earlier. You talked about the managing editor. Would you expect? Would the managing editor have made that decision?
It would have been the management. It would have been the management of the legal cases, I would think. But I think we have to. I'm happy to go back and look at that. But it was not something that came to my attention for approval.
But who would make that decision?
I'd like to say, things of that amount would certainly not come before or having to do with the managing editors.
It wouldn't. Would it have been above the managing editor or below the managing editor?
It'd be above.
Well, above.
This would have been This would have been on legal advice, payments made about how to handle litigations. And again, I don't have direct knowledge or details around the current status of those. But I can tell you, I was as surprised as you are to find that some of those arrangements had been made.
Mr. Murdoch Senior, I seem to be getting further with you, for which I'm grateful. Would it have been Les Hinton? Would he have agreed? Would he have had to sign that off?
It could have been.
It could have been. Would have been or could have been?
Could have been.
Who else could it have been?
The chief legal officer.
Right. And but without any
about signing checks or approval?
Both.
Signing checks could be, assistant CFO or someone, but it would be on the instructions of the chief legal officer.
Okay. James, you said that you weren't involved in the decision to get rid of Tom Crone. Whose decision was that?
The management of the company at the time, recently, the chief executive, Mrs. Brooks.
Okay. That was her decision. And
she's the chief executive of the company, and senior level personnel decisions are made by that.
When Stuart Kuttner left the company, he left either the day of or the day after allegations were made in The Guardian originally about phone hacking. Was that linked? Did he resign? Was he sacked? What happened to Stuart Kuttner? How did he leave the company?
I don't know. That would have been at the time a News of the World matter for them.
Or for you to ask him.
Why did Les Hinton resign?
Les Hinton resigned sadly last Friday following Rebecca Brooks' resignation and saying, I was in charge of the company during this period that we're under criticism for, and I feel I must step down.
Were either Rebecca Brooks or Les Hinton, were they asked to leave, or did they ask to leave?
They both asked to leave.
Why did you not accept Rebecca Brooks' resignation when she first offered it?
Because I believed her and I trust her, and I do trust her.
And so why did you accept it the second time round? Why did you accept it?
In the event, she just insisted. She was at a point of extreme anguish.
Can you tell us how much all of these characters have been paid off? How much they've been given in as a financial settlement on their departure from News International?
No, I can't tell you, but in the case of Mr. Hinton, it could certainly be considerable because it'd be pensions for 52 years service, a great deal of things.
And would it be 10 million? 5 million? 10 million?
Those are
Pounds?
confidential.
I don't know.
Those
They're
are
certainly confidential.
And is there any confidentiality in their payoff, that they're not supposed to speak about what happened or what their time at your company or what they know?
Mr. Davies.
No.
Clauses like that in there?
Mr. Davies, the a settlement, a compromise agreement, when somebody resigns or leaves the business in circumstances like this, there are commercial confidentiality agreements, but nothing that would stop or inhibit the executive from cooperating fully with investigations, from being transparent about any wrongdoing or anything like that. And it's important to note that in these agreements, they are made on the basis of no evidence of impropriety. And if evidence of impropriety emerges or was there prior to that departure, then you would have a different piece. But that's an important point, I think, just to be clear about.
My final question is, it seems to me, on the face of it, that the News of the World was sacrificed in order to try and protect Rebecca Brooks's position at News International. That in effect, rather than her having her departure being announced, the News of the World was offered up as an alternative to try and deal with the whole thing. Do you regret now making that decision? Do you regret closing the News of the World to try and save Rebecca Brooks? And that in hindsight, do you wish you'd accepted her resignation to start with, in order that paper with a fine tradition could probably continue, and all of the people who are now out of work or struggling to find a job could still be in work?
I regret very much the fate of people who will not be able to find work. The two decisions were totally unrelated. Absolutely and totally unrelated.
So when you came into the UK and said your priority was Rebecca Brooks, what did you mean?
I'm not sure I did say that. I was quoted as saying that. I walked outside my flat and I had about 20 microphones stuck in my mouth, so I'm not sure what I said.
So you were misquoted, so to speak.
I'm not saying that. I just don't remember.
I think it's important. I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman. Yeah. Mr. Davies, it's important to remember, the closure of a newspaper with a history, 160 some odd years history, is something that is a grave thing, and something that is a serious matter of regret for us, for the company. But much more serious than that is the seriousness of really the violation of privacy, the hurt that certain individuals at the News of the World caused to the victims of illegal voicemail interceptions and their families. And I can tell you, I advocated at the time that this was a step that we should take. This was a paper and a title that had fundamentally violated the trust of its readers. And it's something that was a matter of great regret, real gravity, but under the circumstances and with respect to the bad things that certain of the things that happened at the News of the World some years ago did, it was really the right choice for the paper to cease publication. Now, it is important to note, and I want to be clear with the committee on this, that the company is doing everything it can to make sure that journalists and staff at the News of the World who had nothing to do with any of these issues, who are completely blameless in any of these things, and many are, really done tremendous work journalistically, professionally, commercially for the business, that we find reemployment for them wherever we can. And I think the company is being as generous as we can under the circumstances. The company is being as thoughtful and compassionate for them and their families to get through this. But it is a very regrettable situation, and one that we did not take lightly in any way.
You have made that clear. I'm going to ask for members. I don't want to cut anybody off, but please, we do still have some way to go. Paul Farrelly.
Thank you, John. I just want to return to how John opened the session and the evidence that was given to us previously. But I just, in connection with Mr. Davies' questioning, there was one key question he omitted to ask. Mr. Murdoch, James, through all the civil actions, have you been paying Glenn Mulcair's legal fees? Not you personally, your organisation.
As I said earlier to the question from Mr. Davies,
Let's keep it short. Yes or no? It's a yes or no question.
I don't know the current status of those. You asked the question: Are we paying all of Mr. Mulcair's legal fees?
Have you been paying legal fees for Glenn Mulcair during the course of the civil actions?
I don't know the details of the civil actions, but I do know that certain legal fees were paid for Mr. Mulcair by the company, and I was as surprised and shocked to learn that as you are.
Can you understand that people might ask why a company might wish to pay the legal fees of a convicted felon who's been intimately involved in the destruction of your reputation?
I can.
If it were not to buy his cooperation and silence.
No, it's not. I can understand that, and that's exactly why I asked the question. It's exactly what when the allegations came out, I said, how could we? Are we doing this? Is this what the company is doing? And on legal advice, and again, I don't want to be legalistic, and I'm not a lawyer. But these are serious litigations. It's important for all of the evidence from all of the defendants to get to court at the right time. And the strong advice was that from time to time it's important and customary even to pay co-defendants legal fees. And that is what, and I have to rest on counsel's advice on some of these serious litigation matters.
Is the organisation still contributing to Glenn Mulcair's legal fees?
As I said earlier, Mr. Farrelly, I don't know the precise status of that now, but I do know that I asked for those things for the company to find a way for those things to cease with respect to these things.
Will you let us know?
I'm happy to follow up with the committee on the status of those legal fees.
This is a serious question, Mr. Murdoch Senior. Is it not time for the organisation to say enough is enough? This man allegedly hacked the phone of the murdered schoolgirl Millie Dowler. Is it not time for your organisation to say, do your worst, you behave disgracefully, we're not going to pay any more of your costs?
I would like to do that. I don't know the status of what we're doing or indeed what his contract was or whether it still has any force.
If the organisation is still paying his fees, will you give the instruction now that should stop?
Provided there's not in breach of a contract, a legal contract, yes.
I just want to return now to the question of making statements to Parliament without being in full possession of the facts. During our 2009 inquiry, all the witnesses who came to us testified to being intimately involved in particular, a huge trawl of emails after the arrival of Colin Myler. It seems over the past few days they've been rather quick to try and distance themselves from that investigation, according to some of the quotes in the newspapers. So could I, and it was stated to us clearly that trawl, that investigation uncovered no new evidence. It was still a lone rogue reporter. So, Mr. Murdoch, James, can you tell us about the file of emails, the so-called internal report that was discovered allegedly? We read through the pages of the Sunday Times, a great newspaper, in the offices of Harbottle and Lewis. Can you tell us a little bit more about when that was discovered, when you first came to know about it, what's in it?
I first came to know about that earlier this year, in 2011.
Can you be more precise about the time? You've got a great grasp of chronology.
It would have been in the springtime. I don't remember the exact date when I was told about it.
Before April?
It would have been April or May. I can try to find the meeting schedules and whatnot and come back.
Yeah,
but it was a number of months ago. It was a few months ago, and I can't speak. I should say I can speak a little bit to it, but as to the activity that was carried out in 2007, again, I pieced this back together from the past. It was before any of my involvement, but the company at the time, I think you're referring to, there was a dismissal, an unfair dismissal case that was brought by Mr. Goodman, and that was the basis for conducting. It was right about the time of the convictions. It was all in that period of time.
That was what we inferred in our report last year, but we were, despite the assurances as to the other motivations.
Well, it was right at the time Mr. Myler had come in. codes of standards had been talked about. This is before my time. All of the 2007 business was there, and an investigation was done, or a fact-finding piece around this. And there was outside counsel was brought in. It was Harbottle and Lewis by the company at the time, and I understand that the legal executives, I think it was Mr. Chapman at the time, along with Mr. Myler, who testified to this effect, went took a report from them, and the opinion was clear that as to their review, there was no additional illegality with respect to phone hacking in that file. And as to their review, that was the opinion that was clear. And the company really rested on a number of things from then on. And I certainly know in 2009, when additional allegations came in the summer, the company really rested on a handful of things.
We know this. I just wanted to move right up to date to what was discovered in the offices of Harbottle and Lewis and when it was discovered.
So in 2010, after the civil litigations had put a spotlight, or unearthed, if you will, to us, to the company, additional new evidence, new information that hadn't been there before, and the police investigation started off. One of the things that went back and looked at, I suppose it was in the spring, by senior people at News International, was that file, and it was re-looked at. It was opened up and looked at, and it was very rapidly brought to our attention that this was something that
When did this happen? When was this looked at?
It was, again, this is between this is sort of April, May, June, in that period.
And who looked at it first?
It's
reputedly Will Lewis.
On the side of the people managing the work on behalf of News International from early this year have been led by Mr. Lewis. That's correct.
And what's in that file? It's been reported as a collection of 300 emails or a loose leaf binder. What is it?
Mr. Farrelly, as you know, there is an ongoing criminal investigation, and I think it would be wrong of me to talk about specific information or evidence that is subject to and could make problems for the police in doing the important work that they're currently doing.
I don't think it's going to cause problems to the police if you tell us whether it's A4, foolscap emails in a ring binder, loose leaf. What is it? What is this?
It's paper. I mean, I think there are some emails, there are some documents. It's.
And when was it? And have you read it all?
I have not read it all, but some emails, some things in it have been shown to me.
And what was your reaction? Was there an expletive that you'd use when you first read some of these emails?
I tried not to.
But when you do,
utter expletives, but
occasionally when you do.
My reaction immediately was to agree with the recommendation of the executives involved, which was that this was something that we should bring to the attention of the police with respect to their ongoing investigations and perhaps new ones.
And when was it given to the police? It's been reported as June the 20th.
I believe it was in June, after we informed the board of the company as well.
So that date's accurate.
But I believe it was June, yes.
Okay. The Sunday Times, a great newspaper, painted a picture on the 10th of July from this file that a cabal of 6 so-called gatekeepers on the news desk dealt with Glenn Mulcair, and it named them as Alex Moranchik, Greg Miskew, Clive Goodman, Neville Thurlbeck, James Weatherup, Ian Edmondson. Do you recognise that summary from the file that you've had a look at?
Mr. Farrelly, respectfully, I would ask you to please understand that detailed questions about any of the evidence, information that we've passed to the police in relation to their ongoing criminal inquiries are difficult for me to answer, and I would appreciate it if we could allow the police to undergo the important work that they are undergoing. There is a process that's important. We are cooperating with it. We are providing information on a regular basis. The company is providing information on a regular basis as needed by the police, and I really believe that we have to allow the police to conduct their investigation and hold the people who did wrong to account in this area.
Okay, I'll respect that.
I think if we were to comment on anything now, it could result in guilty people
I fully understand.
Mr. Farrelly.
I will respect that, and clearly the descriptions in the press, so they're on the record, actually do, and including in the Sunday Times, do mention that the emails implicate Andy Coulson in knowledge of payments to the police, but I wouldn't expect you to comment on that. So I will now just turn to the Harbottle and Lewis letter that was provided to us by Rebecca Brooks. As evidenced during our inquiry that this trawl of emails had produced nothing more, and that letter from Lawrence Abrahamson, the then senior partner of Harbottle and Lewis, mentioned that emails had been reviewed of Andy Coulson, Stuart Kuttner, Ian Edmondson, Clive Goodman, Neil Wallace, and Jules Stenson, and that nothing had come to light from that review that contradicted the lone reporter, rogue reporter working with Glenn Mulcair. Knowing what you know now from the other evidence you've discovered, have you looked back in detail at the basis on which Harbottle and Lewis wrote that letter, and why they gave such a clean bill of health?
All I can say is that having having looked at some of the things in that, and the advice of the senior people inside the company more recently that went and looked at that, it was the view of the company, self-evidently, that it was right to bring this to the attention of the police and go forward. And that opinion from the council was something that the company, rested on. It was a clear opinion about a review that was done around those records, and in addition, in conjunction with the police continuing to say that there was no new evidence and that there was no reason to open a new investigation, and in conjunction with the PCC saying that they had done their review and done their inquiry and there was nothing new there, it was viewed that was a settled matter. And it was only really when new evidence emerged that those three things began to be undermined.
In a follow-up to the session, could you just provide us with the instructions that were given to Harbottle and Lewis, the information, the extent of the information that was given to them out of the totality of information that was available? That sort of detail would help us conclude what really.
I think if there's additional detail required around some of those legal instructions, we will consult and come back to the chairman with a way to satisfy you with the information that you'd like to have.
I mean, clearly, we spotted last in our report that this review coincided not so much with Mr. Myler's arrival, but with the timing of the Industrial Tribunal actions that Clive Goodman and Glenn Mulcair were planning. And that begged the question of why these 6 individuals were named in there. Do you know the reason why it was limited to these 6 individuals?
Why it was limited to those 6 individuals, I don't know. I think it was I wasn't there at the time, and I can't tell you the circumstances, the conversations that people had with Harbottle and Lewis, or the terms of reference of that. But it was viewed that was something that would be, and had been viewed after the fact, that was, had been a thorough look at information, and based on that review, that opinion was issued.
Neville Thurbeck is one omission that immediately jumps out.
Again, in hindsight, we can all say, if somebody had looked at this, or somebody had known something that wasn't known yet at the time, but I can't comment on why the terms and why the scope was what it was.
The proceedings by Goodman and Mulcair for unfair dismissal, notwithstanding their criminal convictions, clearly never saw the light of day because they were settled beforehand. So therefore, we don't know what they were planning to serve on you. Do you know what sorts of allegations that they were making? We can only imagine that they were saying that such and such a person knew, such and such a person knew. Have you satisfied yourself about what allegations they were making?
Mr. Farrelly, I think many of these individuals you mentioned are currently subject to criminal investigation. Some have been arrested recently, and these are important matters for the police now. And I do think it's important that I don't stray into, or I'm not led into, commenting specifically about individuals or allegations made in the past.
Whether you satisfy yourself as to what Clive Goodman and Glenn Mulcair were alleging in discussions and negotiations that led up to the settlement if they brought industrial tribunal proceedings against you? That was the question.
As to Glenn
Not
Mulcair,
about what they were alleging, but have you satisfied yourself about what they were alleging?
As to Glenn Mulcair, I'm not aware of allegations at the time and other things. And as to Goodman, again, this was in 2007 before I was there, it's my understanding that that is what Harbottle and Lewis were helping to deal with, and that opinion did satisfy the company at the time, and the company rested on that opinion for a period of time.
I take it you'd like to take the opportunity to withdraw this letter as an accurate portrayal of what really went on at the News of the World.
Is that the
This
letter?
is the Harbottle and Lewis letter.
It's something that I think it's something that actually, I'm glad you've asked about it, actually, because it is a key bit of outside legal advice from senior counsel that was provided to the company that the company rested on. And I think it goes some distance in explaining actually why it has taken a long time for new information to come to light. And I would say, Mr. Farrelly, I think it's important, it was one of the bases for which, if you will, the sort of pushback that the company made against new allegations. It was one of the sort of pillars of the environment around the place that led the company to believe that all of these things were a matter of the past and that new allegations could be denied.
The question again was different, Mr. Murdoch. I asked you whether this letter, which is still lying on the record as evidence given to this committee, and has not, for whatever reason, no doubt you'll say to do with the criminal investigation, been withdrawn, would you like to withdraw it?
Mr. Farrelly, respectfully, I am not aware of the legal technicalities of withdrawing that or submitting it on the record. I think it is a relevant document in trying to understand how News International was thinking at the time.
We'll ask you the question when we.
So I would say no, but I can come back after taking counsel and seeing if it's a better idea to do it.
I want to wind up, given the time, but I've got a few more questions. When, as you've described it, and as Colin Myler described it to us, the email investigation was carried out by the IT department, and it was overseen by the Director of Legal Affairs, John Chapman, and the Human Resources Director, Daniel Cloak. Is that your understanding?
Pardon me, what was the question? I don't understand. Is it my understanding that...
The investigation itself, you have described it, Colin Myler described it to us. It was carried out by the IT department and overseen by the Director of Legal Affairs, John Chapman, and the Human Resources Director, the Personnel Director, Daniel Cloak. Is that an accurate description?
That is my understanding.
Okay. Can you tell us why John Chapman has left the organisation?
John Chapman and the organisation decided it was, in mutual interest to part ways, and I think I think one of the pieces here as well is for the company to move forward is for, and I think this is important. Many of the individuals, even if there's no evidence of wrongdoing or anything like that, and I think that and no evidence of impropriety, many individuals have chosen that it's time to part ways.
So
I was not involved with the discussions with Mr. Chapman.
You have no evidence
of
any complicity by Mr. Chapman to cover up the existence of the file that's belatedly been discovered?
I do not have that.
Okay. And can you tell us the employment status of Daniel Cloak?
Mr. Cloak left the company some time ago,
He's
and I don't know what his employment status is. He's not in the business. He was the Director of Human Resources for a number of years, not that many actually, I'm not sure, but left over a year ago, I think, but I can follow up with you the status.
Okay. And just turning very quickly to the witnesses who came to us. And again, in respect of the file that you've discovered this year, regarding Les Hinton, when did he first become aware of this collection of emails and paper, as you discovered to call it, that clearly rendered the advice given, the evidence given to us misleading by him? When did he learn about it?
I can't speak to Mr. Hinton's knowledge of that. Are you referring to in 2011 or in 2007?
This document that was left in
2007. You would. I can't speak to his knowledge, but I I know that Mr. Hinton was aware of the work that had been carried out, and I think he's testified to this committee to that effect.
Have you asked him whether, Mr. Murdoch Senior, have you asked Les Hinton whether he knew about this document?
No.
Why not?
About
This document.
Which document?
We're talking about the
document
document that you discovered in April, May, in the offices of Harbottle and Lewis. That.
I don't think it's I have not asked him, but I also think that I think he's testified this, that he, as the chief executive of New Zealand International at the time, would not have been expected necessarily to read X hundreds or thousands of emails there, but would rely on the opinion of counsel about what they had done.
And was Colin Myler aware of this evidence lying with the Harbottle and Lewis?
I cannot speak to other individuals' knowledge in the past. I simply don't.
And Tom Crone?
I simply, Mr. Farrelly, can't. I can't speak for them.
And Stuart. That's a German pronunciation. Sorry, Stuart Kuttner.
The same goes, Mr. Farrelly. I simply can't speak for them.
And Rebecca Brooks.
I simply cannot speak for their knowledge. I know that Mrs. Brooks, when she was chief executive of this, was one of the people who brought it to my attention as a new thing.
Just to finish off this question, I'm just going to wrap up. But we're left now in a situation where you, having looked into this affair, having cooperated with the police, cannot tell us who lodged the file with Harbottle and Lewis, who was aware of its contents, and who kept you from being in the full possession of the facts. Evidence that is clearly now being submitted to the police, but clearly contradicts all the assurances that we were given, not in one but in two select committee inquiries. And that's frankly, I hope you'd agree, unsatisfactory.
Mr. Farrelly, I can say that the company at the time engaged an outside law firm to review a number of these emails. They were provided to the law firm, as I understand it. They were reviewed. An opinion based on that review was issued to the company of a respected outside law firm, and the opinion was clear. And the company rested on that. I cannot speak to individuals' knowledge at different times, and because I simply don't know. What I do know is that the company rested on that, rested on the fact that the police told us that there was no new evidence, there was no reason for a new investigation, and rested on the opinion of the PCC that there was no new information and no reason to carry it further. And it wasn't until new evidence emerged from the civil trials, the civil litigations that were going on, that the company immediately went to the police, restarted and the company has done the right thing in that
This is
respect.
evidence that was lying in your company's and your lawyer's possession all the time. It's not simply evidence that emerged through litigation. Can I, Mr. Murdoch Senior,
The Harbottle file was re-looked at. Sorry, Mr. Farrelly. May I?
Yes, carry on.
Was looked at in conjunction with the new and restarted criminal investigation. And these are serious matters, and we take them seriously. When we looked at those, when it was looked at, and it was deemed that these things would be of interest to the police, we immediately actually brought in additional counsel, Lord MacDonald, who I believe you, Mr. Farrelly, mentioned earlier, and to help advise the company on what the appropriate way forward in terms of full transparency and cooperation with police investigations were. And they're very serious matters, and the company took them very seriously.
Mr. Murdoch Senior, just two questions.
Very quickly, Paul.
The situation that I've just painted, where we're now here, not knowing who at News International, News of the World, was complicit in keeping that file containing however many bits of paper. We're nowhere near knowing who knew what and when about that file. Evidence that clearly contradicts not only the statements given to the Select Committee, but evidence, as it would appear, that led your closest and trusted aide over many years, Les Hinton, to give misleading evidence. Do you find that a satisfactory state of affairs?
No, I do not.
And what do you think the company should do about it in a follow-up to this Select Committee inquiry?
Well, Mr. Chapman, who's in charge of this, has left us. He had that report for a number of years, and it wasn't until Mr. Lewis looked at it carefully that we immediately said we must get legal advice, see how we go to the police with this, how we should present it, etc.
Okay. My understanding is that the file was with the lawyers. It was with the law firm, and there would have been no reason to go and relook at it. Again, the opinion of it was very, very clear based on the review that was done. And as soon as it was in a new criminal investigation, it was deemed appropriate to look at. It was immediately done so.
Mr. Murdoch, you either haven't grasped the point or you're not reading your own newspapers in the form of the Sunday Times. My final question, Mr. Murdoch. Given the picture that's been painted of individuals on a news desk acting as gatekeepers for a private investigator, do you think it's possible at all that editors of your newspaper would not have known about these activities? Do you think it's remotely possible?
I can't say that because of the police inquiries and I presume coming judicial proceedings. That's all I can tell you, except it was my understanding, I better not say it, but it was my understanding that Mr. Myler was appointed there by Mr. Hinton to find out what the hell was going on, and that he commissioned that Harbottle and Lewis inquiry. Now, that is my understanding of it. I cannot swear to the accuracy of it.
Thank you.
I am going to appeal for brevity because we've been going for 2 hours now. Alan Keane.
Please, brief as I can. To James Murdoch, what we'd like to know is it's a mystery to us how Sunday newspapers are run. I'm very familiar with the engineering industry. Could you try and paint a picture of a week's operation at News of the World? What period were you closely involved controlling the News of the World?
My involvement in the business was overseeing the region of Europe and Asia. Just to be clear, in 2008, starting in the middle of December in 2007, I was chief executive for Europe and Asia, our European television business, our Asian television business, as well as our UK publishing business. Yeah. One title of which is the News of the World. So I can't say that I was ever intimately involved with the workings of the News of the World.
Yeah. So what results would come to you, presumably within the 7 days after publication? Presumably the sales, the advertising income, and you judge the newspaper on the profitability week by week, presumably. I know that Rupert Murdoch is far removed from that, but when you were in closer...
I certainly get that.
But yeah, you would get that.
I mean, these are enterprises, and sales and advertising figures and personnel numbers and all of those things are relevant. Managers look at those things.
We understand from questions that have been answered already that when it comes to legal issues, settlement of claims, that's taken outside from the day-to-day management of the newspaper. That's right, isn't it?
Each group of companies or titles will have their own legal executives who will deal with things like libel and other things that will try to check that something doesn't go into the paper that's going to be wrong, etc. Sometimes that's right, sometimes it's wrong. But each has its own legal resource, and the managing editor's office is very involved in those things, as well as the counsel's office in the newspapers.
Yeah. So the editor of the News of the World.
To give you an example of my son's typical week. It would well have been, a day in Munich, or a day in Sky Italia, where he had a very particularly difficult situation with a particularly tricky competitor, how may I say so? And He had a lot on his plate.
I leave some of the more mundane issues then. It came clear from the first couple of questions to you, Rupert Murdoch, that you've been kept in the dark quite a bit on some of these real serious issues. Is there no...
Nobody kept me in the dark. I may have been lax in not asking more, but it was such a tiny part of our business.
I understand that, but obviously, you've come to this point, he wouldn't be here if it wasn't extremely serious.
It's become extremely serious.
Is there no written rules that certain things have to be reported straight to the very top? It sounds if there are no such rules. It's
anything that's seen as a crisis.
It's left to the trust of.
Anything that's seen as a crisis comes to me.
Mr. Keane, may I? I think it's important to know that there's a difference between being kept in the dark and a company that's a large company, the management of which is delegated to managers of different companies within the group and so on and so forth. And I think to suggest that my father or myself were kept in the dark is a different thing from saying that actually the management and the running of these businesses is often delegated either to the chief executive of a different company or an editor or a managing editor or an editorial floor, and decision-making has to be there. There are thresholds of materiality, if you will, whereby things have to move upstream. So something has to be brought to the attention. From a financial threshold point of view, I think we addressed that earlier with respect to the settlement, out-of-court settlement with Mr. Taylor. But also from the standpoint of things like alleged criminality, violations of our own code of conduct, things like that, those are things that are the company's internal audit function, as well as the audit committee, as well as the senior executives of the committee are expected to be made aware of, as they were in the case of the criminal prosecutions in 2007.
But whatever efforts were made, whatever rules there were, we've reached. News International has reached a crisis point. Otherwise, you wouldn't be here today, and News of the World wouldn't have been closed. Who really is responsible? Who do you hold responsible for that failure? If you're saying that people should have told you, but you're really saying just now, not that they should have told you, but you let them get on and manage it. But they should have told you, shouldn't they? What's going wrong?
Mr. Keane, it's a good question, but I think it's not to say that we're saying, and I'm not saying that somebody should have told me. To my knowledge, certain things were not known. And when new information came to light, with respect to my knowledge of these events and to the understanding that when new information came to light, the company acted on it. And the company acted on it in a right and proper way as best the company could. But it's difficult to say that the company should have been told something if it's not known that a thing was a known fact to be told. Now, I've been asked today that, about what other people knew when, and I can only rest on what they have told me or what they have told you in previous hearings, and I understand completely your frustration about this. You can imagine my own frustration in 2010 when the civil litigation came to a point where these things came out, and to suddenly realize that actually the pushback or the denial of the veracity of allegations that had been made earlier, particularly in 2009, had been too strong. And that's a matter of real regret, because all the facts were not known when that was done. And that is a matter of deep regret, and it is why we're here today with you, trying to be as transparent as we possibly can.
I suppose this is really a rhetorical question, because I'm sure your answer will be what I expect, but it's admirable, the fact that you've had such long-term employees who become friends, very close friends, I'm sure, over the years. And Mr. Rupert explained that with his determination to look after Rebecca Brooks. So it's admirable, but there was a lot of criticism at the time that this isn't a criticism, James, of your ability, but there was criticism in the financial press that it was nepotism to a point. In retrospect, that's why I say it's a rhetorical question. I know what the answer will be. But do you regret Do you regret, Mr. Rupert, that it has become really a family organisation?
Let me just go back over this. When the job became available of head of ICYMI, several people applied, including my son. They passed through all sorts of, not just board committees, but outside experts, etc., who made the conclusion that he was the right person. The press all had a field day. When he left to go to, well, I promoted him to take charge of much wider responsibilities. We had calls from all the big shareholders, I say all, many big shareholders, saying it was a terrible thing to take him away because he had done such a great job.
Yeah, I said I wasn't disputing the ability of James, but the fact that you didn't know about so many of these criminal activities that went on, do you not think that was made more likely because of the sort of family history? I don't just mean James here, I'm talking about people who weren't direct members of your family but became friends. And it's admirable.
No.
You don't think that's had any
I don't think so. I don't think Mr.
mismanagement, because it has been mismanaged.
I don't think Mr. Hinton misled me for a minute, but you must find out for yourself and make your own conclusion. Other people who gave the same evidence may well have been misleading you, but he certainly did not know of anything there.
Thank you very much.
I've got two more members. Damian Collins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I address my questions to the hearing, I just have to make a short declaration of my own, which is something I previously declared to the committee, which is to say that my wife is an employee of a company called Edelman, which has been engaged by News Corporation. She's never worked on this account and has no access to the information relating to it, but I just want to share that with you before asking any questions. Mr. Rupert Murdoch, you said earlier on that we live in a transparent society. Do you think it's right that people in public life can expect total privacy in a society like that?
No.
And where do you think the limits of that lie? I noticed in the Watergate investigation, for example, personal banking and phone records were used, belonged to one of the witnesses that were relevant to that investigation. And so to what extent do you think the use of confidential private information, even phone records, even phone hacking, is permissible in the pursuit of a news story?
Oh, I think phone hacking is something quite different. But I do believe that investigative journalism, particularly competitive, does lead to a more transparent and open society, inconvenient though that may be to many people. And I think we are a better society because of it. And I think we are probably more an open society than even the United States.
Where do you draw the line with that, if I may ask? Where are the boundaries of legitimate investigation? What's out of bounds?
Well, there was a great... Well, we'd done it would have been a terrible outcry. When I'm sorry to say this, and I don't know your circumstances or anyone else around here, but when the Daily Telegraph bought a series of stolen documents of all the expenses of MPs, it caused a huge outcry, one of which I feel has not been properly addressed. I think there is an answer to it, and we ought to look at the most open and clear society in the world, which is Singapore, where every minister gets at least $1 million a year, and the Prime Minister a lot more, and there is no temptation, and it is the cleanest society you'd find anywhere.
Good luck in selling that idea.
May I help, Mr. Collins?
No, I mean that seriously. It is ridiculous that people were reduced to doing what they did.
May I help, Mr. Collins? Which is that because I think it's a very good question, and I think it's a really important question, and I understand it's going to be one of the subjects of the judicial inquiry which the Prime Minister announced last week, which as a company we immediately welcomed and we look forward to. This question of public interest, the question of what's acceptable and what isn't in terms of investigative techniques is an important one. But let me be very clear the codes of conduct of News Corporation globally for our employees, journalists or otherwise, are very clear that breaking the law is a very, very serious matter. It should be, people who are lawbreakers should be held to account. And in the matter of something like phone hacking or topically payments to police and things like that, we just don't think they should have any place in our business.
So, James Murdoch, you would be very clear that within your company, within your organisation, senior people should have been very aware that phone hacking was not only illegal but totally unacceptable.
Well, I think after the particularly in light of the successful prosecutions and convictions of the individuals involved in 2007, it could not be taken more seriously. And if new evidence emerges, and as it has in cases, the company acts on it very, very quickly.
To what extent do you think you have a cultural problem? I mean, Rupert Murdoch, if I may, do you think you have a cultural problem within your organisation that people only tell you things that they think you want to hear, and that even people that have been your trusted advisors and worked with you for years simply withhold information because they want to curry favour?
No, not my trusted advisors, certainly. You should hear the conversations in my office. They're coming in all the time.
Forgive me, I'm not asking because a lot of your trusted advisors have now left the company. So a lot of your trusted advisors have now left the company.
Most people say I've got crazy ideas and advise against me.
So a lot of your trusted advisors have left your company, though.
We're a very big company. I'm sure there may be people who try to please me. That could be human nature, and it's up to me to see through that.
May I also to what extent do you think there is pressure on editors and senior managers to get scoops, to outdo each other, to win favour within the organisation that leads them to take risks and clearly, in the case of News of the World, push boundaries that broke the law?
Do you want to ask that again? I'm sorry.
Do you think there is a pressure on editors of your newspapers which leads them to take risks and break boundaries where in the News of the World there was illegal action and wrongdoing, people broke the law in order to get scoops?
No, I think it's totally wrong. There is no excuse for breaking the law at any time. There is an excuse, if I may say so, and I think rightful for newspapers, all newspapers, when they wish to campaign for a change in the law, but never to break it.
Just two further questions, if I may.
I just say, perhaps addressing this a minute, I just wanted to say that I was brought up by a father who was not rich but was a great journalist. And he, just before he died, bought a little small paper, specifically in his will saying he was giving me the chance to do good. And I remember what he did and what he was most proud of, and for which he was hated in this country by many people for many, many years, which was expose the scandal of Gallipoli, which I remain very, very proud of.
I think all students of history are well aware of
this. That just addresses the question of being a family business. I would love to see my sons and daughters follow their, if they're interested.
If I may, Rupert Murdoch, you said earlier on that you have had frequent meetings with prime ministers during your career. In the period after the arrest,
I wish they'd leave me alone.
of Clive Goodman, which you said you were aware. You said earlier on that you were aware of the situation when Clive Goodman was sent to prison, and you're aware of the case at that stage. In the years after that, where there were numerous reports, investigations, hearings of this committee, we've heard a lot about them today. Did any senior politicians that you're in contact with, or you were in contact with during that period of time, raise this as an issue with you, raise concerns about phone hacking?
Absolutely never. The politician I met most in those days was Mr. Brown, when he was Chancellor of the Exchequer. His wife and my wife struck up quite a friendship, and our children played together on many occasions. And I'm very sorry that I'm no longer. I felt he had great values, which I shared with him, and I'm sorry that we've come apart, and I hope one day we'll be able to put it together again.
Just one final question to Rupert Murdoch, which is, you said in the interview you gave to the Wall Street Journal that you thought that your fellow executives of the News Corporation had handled this crisis very well with just a few minor mistakes. Do you stand by that statement, or do you believe the the level of mistakes was far greater than that?
Well, they seem very big now. I mean, what we did was terrible, but you're talking about handling the crisis. Sorry, I'm starting to just tell me not to gesticulate. I don't believe that either he or Mr. Hinton made any great mistakes, but were mistakes made within the organisation? Absolutely. Were people I trusted or that they trusted badly betrayed? Yes.
Finally, to James Murdoch, it was reported that when Rebecca Brooks spoke at to staff when the News of the World, the announcement of the closure of the News of the World was made, that she said that in a year's time they might understand why the paper had to close. What do you think? I won't ask you to comment on what she thought in saying that, but do you think what's the significance of that period of time of a year? Are you expecting there to be significantly more revelations that will come out that made the closure of the News of the World, with hindsight, inevitable?
I don't. I can't speak to what she was specifically referring to. She made those comments herself, and you know, as a when she was saying goodbye, sadly, to the staff. But I can say that, you know, what happened at the News of the World in the events leading up to the 2007 affairs and prosecutions and what we know about those things now were bad. And there are things that should not have any place in our organization, and there are things that we unreservedly and really sincerely am sorry for. We haven't seen the end of this in terms of the ongoing police investigations that are there. As you know, Mr. Collins, there are a number of people who have been arrested. We don't know what's going to happen in the future around those things. But given the breach of trust, given the allegations that were emerging at a rapid pace, you know, it was clear to me anyway, and I think that the future will bear this out, without any specific knowledge of the future, obviously, that, you know, it was the right thing for the paper to cease publication.
Your father said in his Wall Street Journal interview that you, Mr. James Murdoch, had acted as fast as he could, the moment he could. Does that suggest that you were held back at any point? Have you been frustrated in this process in the last few weeks?
As I said to the committee earlier, I can't remember which member, my apologies, but Mr. Collins, you know, this has been a frustrating process, and actually, you know, my frustration, I think, or my real anger to learn that, you know, there was new evidence emerging as late as the end of 2010 was real and is real. And, you know, what I've done and what the company has tried to do is take new information, adjust our course, behave with propriety, behave quickly, behave in a humble way with respect to what's happened and with respect to trying to really put it right. And that's what we're trying to do. It was enormously frustrating. That does not mean that I have any knowledge of anyone intentionally misleading me in the company. I don't, which makes it doubly frustrating. But we are where we are. New information emerged through a legitimate due process of a civil trial. The company acted on it as fast as possibly could be expected, and actually, you know, still new information or new allegations are emerging that, you know, the company is and we are trying to deal with in as right a way as we can and in the best way possible.
Thank you.
And finally, sorry to keep up, Louise Mensch.
The good news is that I am your last questioner, and I will try to be. I have a few very specific questions that I'd like to ask you. Starting with you, Mr. James Murdoch. I know we've been over at length the differences in the size of the settlement paid, the Taylor settlement and the other settlements of a far less monetary value. Can you just tell me whether or not the Taylor settlement included a confidentiality clause and maybe the other settlement did not?
The sitting is suspended for 10 minutes.